Let's now consider examples of heat mass transfer that exist across length scales. We'll be looking all the way from very large scales down to very small scales. In these examples, you'll see that there is often a coupling of heat and mass transfer. The first example we'll look at is that of CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions arise from point sources like power plants as well as vehicles. And that CO2, which starts very concentrated, for instance in a tailpipe, then spreads out throughout the atmosphere, ending up at places that have lower concentrations of CO2. That's an example of mass transfer of carbon dioxide. That CO2 can then also be taken up, for instance, by trees, shown here, or by the oceans. In this case, this is an example of mass transfer being coupled to a reaction. You'll see here that there's also an even broader coupling of mass transfer to heat transfer. This is what we refer to as global warming, that emissions of CO2 act as an infrared blanket for Earth, trapping heat and causing warming of the globe. We can look at another example now, that of dry shampoo. Dry shampoo allows one to get rid of that oily feeling that hair has after it hasn't been washed for a while without having to actually shower. This is a schematic depiction of hair shown in white with oil on all sides of it. So we have a strand of hair here in the middle and oil coating that strand of hair. One can take a can of dry shampoo and spray this into the hair. This dry shampoo, which is shown by these blue particles here, soaks up the oil, and those particles can then be brushed right out. The dry shampoo is a mass transfer problem. The starch, alcohol, and additives of the dry shampoo are acting to soak up oil. There's also an embedded example of heat transfer here, which is that when one uses an aerosolized can, such as that shown here, to spray in the dry shampoo, that can gets cold. There is heat moving from your hand into the can itself. We can consider now one more example, that of atoms that we can individually watch move around at the nanoscale. This is a transmission electron micrograph video, which shows how individual atoms can be watched in a microscope. Here's an example of two atoms, which we are watching move around on the surface of a carbon nanotube. These two atoms are rhenium atoms. The electron beam acts to give these atoms energy, which is an example of heat transfer, and those atoms then move around, and that's an example of mass transfer.